"Mock me again," the waiter said quietly, meeting the billionaire's icy stare without raising his voice. "But just remember, respect has a way of finding its way back." The crystal chandeliers above Sterling House reflected 1,000 points of golden light across polished marble floors, while soft jazz drifted through the dining room like an elegant whisper. Conversations blended with the gentle clink of fine china and silverware, creating the kind of atmosphere reserved for people who believed money could purchase anything, including admiration. On Friday evenings, reservations disappeared weeks in advance, and tonight every table was filled with executives, celebrities, and investors dressed in tailored suits and designer gowns. Among the servers moving gracefully between tables was Ethan Walker, a 38-year-old single father whose pressed white shirt and black apron concealed a life no one bothered to imagine. He carried himself with calm precision, never rushing, never showing frustration, even when customers ignored his greeting or spoke as though he were invisible. Years had taught him that dignity required no audience. At exactly 7 o'clock, the front doors opened, and every conversation seemed to soften. Victoria Sterling entered surrounded not by bodyguards, but by reputation alone. The billionaire CEO of Sterling Global Technologies had built an empire worth billions before turning 35. Financial magazines celebrated her brilliance. Business schools studied her decisions. Employees admired her discipline, but feared disappointing her. She walked through the restaurant with effortless confidence, her charcoal designer suit perfectly tailored, her blonde hair neatly gathered, her expression composed with the certainty of someone accustomed to hearing yes long before asking the question. The maitre d' hurried forward. Managers straightened their jackets. Even seasoned diners glanced toward her table. Ethan approached with the same warm professionalism he offered everyone else. "Good evening, Miss Sterling. Welcome back." His voice was steady, genuine, and unhurried. Victoria barely looked up from her phone before placing it face down on the table. "Sparkling water," she said. "Room temperature. No lemon." Last time someone managed to ruin even that. Ethan nodded politely. "Absolutely." Minutes later, he returned carrying a crystal glass and an unopened bottle. As he poured, another server brushed past behind him, causing the slightest ripple across the surface of the water. Not a single drop escaped the glass, yet Victoria stared at it as though witnessing an unforgivable mistake. "Seriously?" she said loudly enough for neighboring tables to hear. "Do they hire anyone with standards anymore?" Nearby conversations faded. Forks paused halfway to plates. Ethan remained still. "I'm sorry if anything disappointed you, ma'am. I'd be happy to replace it." Victoria leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "Replace the water? Or replace the waiter?" A few uneasy laughs drifted across the room. One executive lowered his eyes. Another reached for his wine, pretending not to notice. Ethan's face never changed. "If another server would make your evening more enjoyable, I'll gladly arrange it." She smiled without warmth. That's the problem with people who settle for jobs like this. They mistake politeness for value. Silence spread slowly across the dining room. Ethan held her gaze with quiet composure, neither embarrassed nor defensive. Then he offered a faint, almost sympathetic smile. "Mock me again, if you believe it improves your evening," he said softly. "Kindness costs less than pride, and it usually lasts longer." No one spoke. Somewhere beyond the dining room windows, the city lights shimmered against the evening sky while the music continued as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Victoria studied him for a long second, puzzled not because he had challenged her, but because he hadn't. She had expected anger, excuses, perhaps humiliation. Instead, she found something she rarely encountered in boardrooms or billion-dollar negotiations: a man who had absolutely nothing to prove. And without realizing it, the first crack appeared in the certainty she had carried into the room. Ethan finished his shift the same way he finished every evening, quietly stacking polished glasses, folding clean linen napkins with careful hands, and wishing each coworker a safe trip home. No one mentioned what had happened in the dining room. Some offered him sympathetic smiles, Others avoided eye contact altogether, unsure whether silence was kindness or discomfort. Ethan simply collected his worn canvas backpack, thanked the kitchen staff, and stepped outside into the cool spring air. The city hummed with its usual rhythm. Taxi horns echoed between tall buildings. A subway train rumbled beneath the streets. Office towers still glowed against the darkening sky, while thousands of people hurried toward lives no stranger would ever understand. Ethan walked 3 blocks before climbing into his aging blue pickup truck. The engine hesitated before finally coming to life with its familiar rumble. He smiled softly and tapped the dashboard once. "Just one more day, old friend." 25 minutes later, he parked outside a modest apartment building on a quiet street lined with maple trees. The building was old but clean, its brick walls warmed by porch lights that welcomed families home. Apartment 3C was small, barely 900 square feet, but every corner carried the feeling of love instead of luxury. As soon as the front door opened, a cheerful voice rushed toward him. "Daddy!" 8-year-old Lily Walker wrapped her arms around his waist before he could even set down his backpack. Her golden hair bounced as she looked up with bright blue eyes that somehow erased every difficult moment from his day. "You are late," she announced with exaggerated seriousness. Ethan laughed. "I know. I owe someone an explanation. You owe someone pancakes tomorrow morning." "That sounds much more serious." She nodded proudly. "Very serious." Ethan knelt beside her. "Then pancakes it is." The little girl smiled as though she had negotiated the biggest business deal in America. The apartment smelled of tomato soup and fresh bread prepared earlier that afternoon. Family photographs lined a narrow bookshelf. Most included Lily laughing beside her father during camping trips, fishing weekends, or simple afternoons at neighborhood parks. One framed picture rested by itself on a small wooden table. A smiling woman stood between them, her hand resting gently on Ethan's shoulder. Lily noticed him looking at the photograph. "I told Mommy about my spelling test today," she whispered. Ethan smiled without taking his eyes off the frame. "I'm sure she's proud of you." "Do you think she still hears me?" she asked quietly. Ethan reached for her hand. "Every good thing you do carries a little piece of her into the world." Lily squeezed his fingers and smiled again. Moments later, she pulled a folded drawing from her school backpack. It showed a restaurant with a man wearing an apron beside a little girl holding balloons beneath a bright yellow sun. Across the top, she had written in careful handwriting, "My dad is my hero." Ethan blinked slowly before hugging her close. No award he had ever imagined could have meant more than those 5 simple words. While Lily finished her homework at the kitchen table, Ethan prepared tomorrow's lunch, packed apple slices into a small container, and carefully counted the remaining bills inside a weathered envelope marked rent. There was not much left after groceries and school supplies, yet his face never reflected worry. He had learned long ago that children remembered peace more than prosperity. Outside, the city chased success beneath glittering skylines. Inside apartment 3C, a father quietly built a different kind of fortune, one bedtime story, one warm meal, and one promise kept at a time, completely unaware that the woman who had questioned his worth only hours earlier had not stopped thinking about the calm in his eyes. Monday arrived wrapped in bright spring sunshine, and Sterling House prepared for one of the most important evenings of the year. Every reservation had been confirmed twice. Every table gleamed beneath fresh candlelight. A private dining room had been reserved for executives from one of the largest investment firms in the country, a partnership that financial reporters had quietly predicted could reshape an entire industry. Managers moved through the restaurant with unusual urgency, checking every detail from floral arrangements to wine temperatures. Ethan Walker arrived 30 minutes early as always. He greeted the kitchen staff by name, helped the younger server polish glasses without being asked, and quietly adjusted a slightly uneven table that no one else had noticed. Excellence, he believed, was not something people performed while others watched. It was something they practiced when no applause was expected. Shortly before 6 o'clock, the front entrance opened again. Victoria Sterling entered with 4 members of her executive team, Their conversations focused on market forecasts and shareholder expectations. She looked as composed as ever, but her thoughts drifted for only a second when she noticed Ethan arranging silverware across the dining room. She remembered his calm voice from 3 nights earlier. She remembered that impossible smile. Most people either argued with her or tried desperately to impress her. He had done neither. She pushed the thought aside and continued toward the private room. The evening unfolded smoothly until an unexpected problem threatened everything. One of the visiting executives from Boston requested a rare bottle of French Bordeaux that had been reserved months earlier. The restaurant manager froze after discovering that the shipment had been delayed by transportation error. The bottle simply was not there. Anxiety spread quickly behind the scenes. Losing such an important client could damage the restaurant's reputation for years. The manager whispered urgently to the sommelier. The sommelier searched every inventory record twice. No solution appeared. Ethan quietly observed the growing concern while carrying a tray of appetizers. He approached the manager with the same respectful tone he always used. "May I make a suggestion?" The manager sighed. "Unless you have a time machine, I do not think anyone can help us." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "The guest enjoys Bordeaux because of its structure, not because of its label. We still have a Napa Valley Cabernet from a family vineyard in Rutherford. The vintage shares many of the same characteristics. If we explain it honestly and present it properly, he may appreciate the recommendation." The manager blinked. "How do you know that?" Ethan simply smiled. "People usually tell you what they value if you listen carefully." There was no time for debate. Moments later, Ethan personally presented the alternative bottle with quiet confidence, describing its history, soil, and aging process without reading a single note. The executive listened carefully before tasting the wine. A long silence followed. Then the distinguished guest smiled. "Excellent recommendation," he said. "Honestly, I may prefer this one." Relief swept through the room like fresh air after storm. Even the sommelier looked genuinely surprised. Across the dining room, Victoria had witnessed the entire exchange. She had expected the waiter to apologize awkwardly or rely on management. Instead, he had solved a problem that seasoned professionals had failed to fix. As the meeting continued, she found herself watching him from time to time. He anticipated guests' needs before they spoke. He recognized accents from different regions. He greeted an elderly couple in fluent French before switching effortlessly to Spanish while assisting another table. Every movement carried quiet confidence without a trace of arrogance. Victoria lowered the business proposal in front of her and studied Ethan with growing curiosity. For the first time since building her empire, she encountered someone whose value could not be measured by a job title, a bank account, or an expensive suit, and somewhere beneath her carefully guarded confidence, a single uncomfortable question quietly began to grow. Who exactly was Ethan Walker before he became a waiter? The question followed Victoria Sterling long after the dinner meeting ended. It lingered during the drive back to headquarters, echoed through the quiet elevator ride to the executive floor, and remained with her as she stood alone before the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. Thousands of lights stretched toward the horizon like stars scattered across the earth, each one representing another ambition, another company, another dream. Usually the view brought her clarity. Tonight, it only reminded her of the waiter whose calm presence refused to leave her thoughts. She finally turned toward her assistant. "Find out everything you can about Ethan Walker." The assistant looked surprised. "The waiter?" Victoria answered without hesitation. "Yes." Something does not add up. By the following afternoon, a slim folder rested on her desk. She expected to find little more than employment records and a routine background check. Instead, she found almost nothing. Ethan had worked at Sterling House for nearly 4 years. Before that, only brief contract jobs appeared on public records. No social media accounts, no interviews, no complaints, no lawsuits, no obvious history. It was as though an entire chapter of his life had quietly disappeared. "That cannot be right," Victoria murmured. "Everyone leaves a trail." Her assistant nodded. "We searched everywhere we legally could. There is very little to find." Victoria closed the folder, strangely disappointed. Meanwhile, Ethan arrived at the restaurant carrying a paper bag filled with homemade blueberry muffins. He placed them in the employee break room with a handwritten note that simply read, "Help yourself." A young hostess smiled. "You really did not have to do this." Ethan shrugged. "My daughter insisted I bake too many. She sounds sweet. She reminds me every day what matters." Before the evening rush began, one of the newer servers struggled with a difficult reservation system after accidentally assigning the same table twice. Panic spread across her face as guests began arriving. Ethan walked beside her without drawing attention. "Take a deep breath," he said gently. "Move the anniversary couple to table 12. They asked for a quieter corner last month. They will actually like it better. Then seat the business clients near the fireplace because they will stay longer." She blinked. "How did you know all that?" Ethan smiled. "People usually return for the way a place makes them feel. Remember that, and the computer becomes much less important." The solution worked perfectly. The hostess whispered her thanks, while Ethan returned to arranging place settings as though nothing remarkable had happened. Later that evening, an elderly gentleman entered the restaurant using a polished wooden cane. His silver hair was neatly combed, and, although age had softened his posture, his sharp blue eyes missed very little. Ethan noticed him immediately. "Good evening, Mr. Whitmore. It is wonderful to see you again." The older man smiled warmly. "Ethan, my friend, still making this place run better than anyone realizes?" Ethan chuckled quietly. "I simply carry the plates. You always carried much more than that." Their conversation lasted only a moment before the gentleman followed the hostess to his table, but Victoria had witnessed every second from across the dining room. She recognized the guest immediately. Charles Whitmore was one of the most respected retired business leaders in the country, a man whose advice still influenced Fortune 500 boardrooms. Yet he had greeted a waiter with unmistakable admiration. Curious, Victoria approached Mr. Whitmore after his meal and introduced herself. He smiled politely, complimented the restaurant, and prepared to leave. Then Victoria asked the question she could no longer ignore. "How do you know Ethan Walker?" The elderly man paused with one hand resting on his cane. A knowing smile slowly crossed his face. "You are asking the wrong question," he replied softly. "The real question is whether you are ready to discover who he chose to become instead of who he could have remained." Before Victoria could respond, Charles Whitmore tipped his hat, stepped into the cool evening air, and disappeared into the waiting car, leaving behind not an answer, but a mystery that suddenly felt far larger than either of them had imagined. The following Thursday began like any other, but by noon an uneasy tension settled over Sterling House. Managers gathered in hushed conversations near the reservation desk. Phones rang more often than usual. The executive chef checked the private dining room twice, then a third time. News had arrived that Orion Capital, one of the largest investment firms in the country, had requested an unscheduled dinner with Victoria Sterling that very evening. Rumors spread quickly among the staff. If the negotiation succeeded, Sterling Global Technologies would secure the largest international expansion in its history. If they failed, months of planning could disappear in a single night. Victoria arrived earlier than expected, reviewing financial projections while walking through the restaurant. Her legal team followed closely behind, discussing numbers worth billions of dollars. But her attention drifted when she noticed Ethan calmly helping a busser carry a heavy stack of clean dishes. He thanked the young employee before quietly returning to his own responsibilities, never acting as though any task was beneath him. The contrast unsettled her more than she cared to admit. At precisely 6:30, the Orion delegation entered the restaurant. Their chairman, Richard Lawson, was known throughout the business world for making decisions based as much on trust as financial performance. He shook Victoria's hand politely, but his smile never fully reached his eyes. Dinner began with pleasant conversation about innovation, manufacturing, and future markets. Then everything changed. One of Orion's senior advisors quietly slid a folder across the table. Richard opened it, studied several pages, and his expression hardened. These production forecasts do not match the numbers we received yesterday, he said. Victoria froneth. That cannot be correct. Her chief financial officer reached for the documents, his face turning pale within seconds. Two versions of the same financial report had somehow been distributed to different members of the negotiating team. The discrepancy was unintentional, but the damage was immediate. Around the table, trust evaporated. Voices remained calm, yet disappointment filled the room more loudly than anger ever could. If your own executives cannot agree on the facts, Richard said quietly, how can we commit billions of dollars? No one answered. Victoria searched for an explanation, but every sentence sounded weaker than the last. Outside the private room, Ethan approached with freshly prepared coffee. He paused as he noticed the unusual silence inside. The restaurant manager intercepted him. Leave it, he whispered. This meeting is falling apart. Ethan glanced through the partially opened door. On the table lay two financial summaries. Even from a distance, he noticed something unusual. The percentages in one report had been rounded differently from those in the other. He looked at the manager. May I say something? The manager stared at him in disbelief. Ethan, these are billion-dollar negotiations. Ethan nodded respectfully. Exactly why a simple mistake should not become a permanent misunderstanding. Before the manager could respond, Victoria noticed Ethan standing quietly outside. Their eyes met for only a moment. She remembered his calm confidence, his thoughtful recommendations, and the words Charles Whitmore had spoken only days earlier. Against every instinct built during years of corporate leadership, she made an unexpected decision. Please, she called. Comein. Every executive turned toward the waiter with visible confusion. Ethan stepped inside without the slightest hint of pride. He placed the coffee service gently on the table before looking at both reports. His eyes moved across the pages for less than a minute. Then he spoke with the same calm voice he had always carried. These numbers are not contradicting each other, he said. They are measuring two different reporting timelines. Someone combined quarterly projections with annual operating assumptions. The calculations themselves are accurate. The comparison is not. Silence settled across the room. The chief financial officer quickly reviewed the documents again, his expression changing from panic to astonishment. He is right, he whispered. We have been arguing over two completely different reporting models. Richard Lawson slowly closed the folder and looked at Ethan with growing curiosity. Victoria did not speak. For the second time in a single week, the quiet waiter had seen what every highly paid executive in the room had somehow missed, and the certainty she had built her entire career upon began to shift in ways she never thought possible. The room remained perfectly still. Even the quiet hum of the climate control seemed louder than anyone's breathing. Richard Lawson picked up both reports again, comparing each page with deliberate care before slowly nodding. Mr. Walker, he said, looking directly at Ethan, that explanation is remarkably precise. Ethan answered with his usual humility. Sometimes the numbers are not the problem. Sometimes the story behind the numbers gets mixed together. A faint smile appeared on Richard's face. That is something every executive in America should remember. Around the table, the legal advisors began reorganizing the documents while the chief financial officer quietly corrected the presentation. What had seemed like the collapse of a historic agreement only minutes earlier now looked like a misunderstanding that could still be repaired. Victoria watched Ethan without speaking. She had built companies by recognizing talent, yet somehow she had completely misjudged the man standing only a few feet away. Thank you, she finally said. Ethan gave a small nod. I'm glad I could help. He turned toward the door, intending to return to the dining room as though nothing extraordinary had happened. One moment, Richard called after him. Ethan stopped politely. Have we met before? Richard asked. Ethan smiled gently. I do not believe so. Richard studied his face for another second. Strange. You remind me of someone I met many years ago. Someone who challenged an entire room of consultants with one question they could not answer. Ethan lowered his eyes briefly. There are many intelligent people in the world. Very few carry themselves the way you do, Richard replied. Ethan offered no response. Instead, He wished everyone an enjoyable evening and quietly left the private dining room, carrying the untouched coffee tray. The heavy door closed softly behind him, leaving the executives staring after the waiter in thoughtful silence. The negotiations resumed with renewed confidence, but Victoria found it increasingly difficult to concentrate on profit margins and expansion plans. Every few minutes her attention drifted toward the dining room, where Ethan continued serving guests with exactly the same patience he had shown before walking into one of the most important business meetings of her career. He accepted no praise. He sought no recognition. To everyone else, he remained simply another waiter. Later that evening, after Orion Capital officially agreed to continue negotiations, Richard approached Victoria near the restaurant entrance. "Your employee impressed me," he said. Victoria nodded slowly. "He surprised all of us." Richard smiled knowingly. No, he surprised only those who judged him too quickly. Those words lingered long after Richard departed. The following morning, Victoria canceled 2 non-essential meetings and drove alone to Charles Whitmore's home overlooking a quiet lake outside the city. The retired businessman welcomed her onto his porch with fresh coffee already waiting. "I suspected you might visit," he said with an amused smile. Victoria wasted no time. "Who is Ethan Walker?" Charles looked across the peaceful water before answering. Years ago, he graduated at the top of his business school class. Before turning 30, he co-founded a technology logistics company that solved supply chain problems most corporations believed were impossible. Victoria stared at him in disbelief. Charles continued quietly. The company grew faster than anyone expected. Investors admired him because he listened more than he spoke. Employees trusted him because he remembered every name. He could have become one of the youngest chief executive officers in the country. Victoria leaned forward. "What happened?" Charles's expression softened. His wife became seriously ill. Ethan sold his ownership, walked away from everything, and devoted every moment to caring for her and their little daughter. After she passed away, he never returned to corporate life. He once told me something I have never forgotten. Charles paused before repeating the words exactly as he remembered them. "Money can replace almost everything except the years your child needed you, and you were too busy earning more money." Victoria lowered her eyes. For the first time in many years, the billionaire who had built an empire without looking back found herself wondering whether success had quietly cost her something she had never stopped to measure. Victoria did not return to Sterling House for 3 days. Her executive team assumed she was consumed by negotiations with Orion Capital, but the truth was far more personal. She spent those evenings replaying conversations she had almost forgotten, hearing her own sharp words spoken across the elegant dining room, and comparing them with Ethan's calm reply. The memory unsettled her in ways quarterly losses never had. She had defeated competitors, survived economic downturns, and built one of the largest technology companies in the nation. Yet one waiter had exposed a weakness she had never noticed in herself. On the 4th evening, she arrived alone. There were no executives following behind her, no assistants carrying folders, and no cameras waiting outside. She requested a quiet table near the windows overlooking the city. Ethan recognized her immediately, but greeted her exactly as he greeted every guest. "Good evening, Miss Sterling. Welcome back." His tone carried neither resentment nor unusual warmth. It was simply kind. Victoria looked at him for a moment before quietly saying, "Good evening, Ethan." It was the first time she had ever used his name. He offered a polite smile and handed her the menu. "May I recommend the cedar roasted salmon tonight? The chef has prepared something special." "I trust your recommendation," she replied. Ethan nodded and walked toward the kitchen. There was no awkwardness in his steps, no desire to remind her of the past. He simply continued doing his work. As the evening unfolded, Victoria watched him move through the dining room. He helped an elderly woman adjust her chair before she even asked. He patiently explained menu options to a young family celebrating their son's birthday. He quietly replaced a child's spilled lemonade before the parents could apologize. Every small gesture carried the same quiet dignity. None of it appeared rehearsed. None of it depended on who was watching. After dinner, Ethan returned with a small dessert plate. "The chef asked me to bring this," he said. "Congratulations on your successful business meeting last week." Victoria looked at the simple slice of warm apple pie and smiled faintly. "Thank you." Ethan turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. "Would you sit with me for just a minute?" He hesitated. "Only if it does not interfere with the other guests." "It will not." He took the empty chair across from her, maintaining the same respectful posture he always carried. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Finally, Victoria folded her hands together. "I owe you an apology." Ethan listened quietly. "The first night we met, I judged you without knowing anything about you. I confused your profession with your value. I was wrong." Ethan looked out the window for a brief moment before answering. "We all make quick judgments sometimes." She slowly shook her head. "No, I made a choice. There is a difference." Her voice softened. "Charles Whitmore told me about your past." Ethan smiled gently. "Charles has always believed I deserve more credit than I do. You walked away from everything. I walked toward someone who needed me more." Victoria lowered her eyes. "I spent years believing success meant never slowing down. Now I'm not so sure." Ethan leaned back slightly, his expression thoughtful rather than proud. "Success is different for everyone. Some people build companies. Some people build families. The fortunate ones find a way to build both." She looked directly at him. "Do you ever regret leaving?" Ethan answered without hesitation. "I miss my wife every day. I do not regret a single day I spent beside her, and I do not regret a single bedtime story I have read to Lily since." A quiet silence settled between them. It was not uncomfortable. It felt honest. Victoria realized that the calm she had mistaken for weakness had always been the strength she had searched for in boardrooms, but rarely found. As Ethan stood to return to work, she spoke one final time. "Thank you for giving me another chance to become a better person." Ethan smiled with the same quiet kindness that had first puzzled her. Second chances become meaningful only when someone chooses to use them well. And for the first time in many years, the billionaire left a business conversation feeling that the most valuable lesson she had received had never appeared on a balance sheet. The weeks that followed unfolded with a quiet rhythm neither Ethan nor Victoria had expected. Orion Capital officially signed the partnership agreement, and business magazines praised Sterling Global Technologies for its disciplined leadership. Yet Victoria found herself measuring success differently. Instead of filling every evening with meetings, she began leaving the office before sunset at least once a week. Sometimes she returned to Sterling House for dinner. Other times, she simply walked through the nearby neighborhood, watching families gather in parks and children race across playgrounds with the kind of carefree joy money could never manufacture. One Saturday afternoon, as warm sunshine painted the city in soft gold, Ethan arrived at a community park carrying a picnic basket and an old baseball glove. Lily ran ahead toward the playground, laughing as a gentle breeze lifted her hair. Ethan settled onto a wooden bench beneath a large oak tree while reading the latest chapter from Lily's favorite adventure book. A familiar voice interrupted his thoughts. "I hope I'm not disturbing family time." Ethan looked up with mild surprise. Victoria stood a few feet away, dressed not in an expensive business suit, but in simple blue jeans, a light sweater, and comfortable sneakers. She carried no phone in her hand, no assistant beside her, and no schedule waiting to interrupt the moment. "Not at all," Ethan replied warmly. Lily noticed the visitor and hurried back toward her father. "Daddy, is she your friend from the restaurant?" Ethan smiled. "Yes, this is Ms. Sterling." Victoria knelt so she could meet Lily at eye level. "Hello, Lily." The little girl smiled brightly. "Daddy says everyone deserves kindness. He says sometimes people are having a hard day, even if they look important." Victoria glanced toward Ethan before softly answering. "Your father is a very wise man." Lily reached into the picnic basket and proudly held up an extra chocolate chip cookie wrapped in a napkin. "Daddy always packs one extra because he says somebody might need it." She extended the cookie toward Victoria without hesitation. "Would you like it?" Victoria accepted the small gift with unexpected emotion. "Thank you. I would love it." They spent the next hour together watching Lily climb, swing, and laugh with other children. There were no discussions about quarterly earnings, stock, prices, or acquisitions. Instead, they spoke about favorite books, camping trips, homemade pancakes, and the simple happiness of hearing birds sing on quiet mornings. Victoria listened more than she spoke. She noticed the patience in Ethan's voice whenever Lily asked another endless childhood question. She noticed how every answer received his full attention, as though nothing in the world mattered more than the little girl beside him. On the drive home that evening, Victoria realized she had smiled more during one afternoon in the park than during countless celebrations inside luxury hotels. The following Monday, she announced a new company initiative. Employees would receive expanded family leave, flexible work schedules for parents, and additional scholarships for the children of hourly workers throughout the company. During the executive meeting, one board member questioned whether such investments would reduce short-term profits. Victoria answered calmly, "Strong companies are built by strong people. Strong people are built by strong families." No one argued. That evening, she stopped by Sterling House once more. Ethan greeted her with the same warm professionalism as always. She smiled as she took her seat. "Lily told me something I cannot stop thinking about," Victoria said. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "She says many memorable things." Victoria laughed softly. "She told me that kindness is like sunlight. It costs nothing to share, but somehow everyone feels warmer." Ethan looked toward the dining room, where guests quietly enjoyed their meals. Children often explain life better than adults. Victoria nodded, knowing that somewhere between a simple cookie, a quiet park, and the gentle wisdom of a little girl, the wall she had spent years building around her heart had finally begun to disappear. Nearly a year passed, and the story that had quietly begun inside an elegant restaurant continued, changing lives in ways no headline could ever capture. Sterling Global Technologies flourished under its new partnership, but employees noticed something even more remarkable than rising profits. Their chief executive officer now knew receptionists by name. She visited company cafeterias instead of dining behind closed executive doors. She personally welcomed new employees during orientation and reminded every manager that respect was not a benefit earned through promotions, but a responsibility carried by everyone. Some called it a leadership transformation. Victoria simply called it learning. On the first anniversary of the Orion Agreement, she organized a company appreciation dinner at Sterling House. Every employee, from executives to maintenance staff, received an invitation. The restaurant glowed beneath warm lights as laughter filled the dining room instead of nervous business conversations. Ethan moved through the room with the same quiet grace he had shown since his very first day. He carried trays, refilled glasses, and congratulated coworkers whose lives had improved because of the company's new family-centered policies. Nothing about him suggested he expected recognition. He had never served kindness for applause, and he had no intention of starting now. As dessert was served, Victoria quietly stepped onto the small stage prepared for the evening's announcements. The room gradually settled into silence. She looked across the crowd before her eyes finally rested on Ethan. "Tonight was supposed to be a celebration of business," she began. "Instead, I would like it to become a celebration of character." Curious whispers faded. Victoria took a slow breath. "1 year ago, I walked into this restaurant believing success gave me the right to measure another person's worth. I was wrong. Every employee listened without moving. I judged a man because of the uniform he wore instead of the values he lived. I confused position with purpose and status with significance." She looked directly at Ethan. "You responded to my pride with patience. You answered disrespect with dignity. You reminded me that real leadership begins with humility." The room remained perfectly still. "Ethan, I owe you more than an apology. I owe you my gratitude because you helped me become a better leader and, more importantly, a better human being." She stepped down from the stage and walked across the dining room until she stood before him. Without hesitation, she extended her hand. Ethan accepted it with the same gentle smile that had first puzzled her many months before. No dramatic speeches followed. No triumphant celebration interrupted the quiet moment. Then something unexpected happened. One employee began applauding. Another joined. Within seconds, The entire restaurant rose to its feet. The applause echoed beneath the crystal chandeliers, not for wealth, not for titles, but for the quiet strength of a father who had never needed to announce his worth. Ethan waited until the applause faded before speaking softly. "Thank you. But if tonight teaches us anything, I hope it reminds us that every person we meet is carrying a story we cannot see. Kindness is often the wisest decision because it never depends on knowing someone's past." A gentle silence followed, deeper than applause itself. Several weeks later, on a bright Saturday morning, Victoria visited the neighborhood park once again. Lily ran toward her carrying a small paper kite decorated with colorful stars. "Come fly it with us," she called happily. Victoria laughed and accepted the string while Ethan watched nearby beneath the familiar oak tree. The kite climbed higher with every passing breeze until it floated against a wide blue sky untouched by clouds. For a long moment, none of them spoke. They simply watched it rise together. Some victories are measured in billions of dollars. Others are measured in second chances, quiet forgiveness, and the simple courage to treat every person with dignity before knowing who they are. In the end, it was never the billionaire who changed the waiter's life. It was the waiter who quietly transformed the heart of the billionaire, proving that the strongest people in the room are often the ones who never need the room to know it.